Since the days of Space Invaders, enemies have served a single, simple purpose: to create a challenge for the player that they can overcome, and in doing so, have fun. But it's not quite that straightforward, is it? Simply challenging the player is easy, but challenging them in a compelling, interesting way? That is much harder. Engineering the perfect enemy requires mastering concepts that are really quite difficult to put into words, and I've spent ages trying to get my head around what separates an all-time great bad guy like Bioshock's Big Daddies, Mario's Goombas or Prey's Mimics from one that's merely good. So, what I've done is outline 4 fundamental characteristics I think most good enemies share as a way to figure out not only what that special secret enemy design ingredient is, but why particular favourite bad guys work so well, and why some just don't. Let's get started with the first characteristic, and that is the idea of an appropriate difficulty. Note that I didn't say that good enemies have to be hard, because they don't. What is important is that enemies have a level of difficulty that reflects the kind of experience they're supposed to create. It's perfectly okay that these cultists you'll see running around in the early stages of Dusk are easy to kill and don't do much damage, because at that point in the game, most of the challenge is in developing the muscle memory and shooting skills you'll need to survive in any good 90s shooter. And so, once the difficulty ramps up in chapters 2 and 3, these enemies will be phased out and replaced with harder and harder variants that feel fair because you've mastered the skills needed to take them on. Of course, easy enemies still have their place, even in sections of a game that are meant to be harder. They can be a great way to ramp up or cool down the level of tension, or to give players a few crucial feel-good power trips to stop the difficulty getting too aggressive. On the flip side, really tricky enemies way above the normal difficulty curve can be a great challenge for experienced players that recreates the thrill of a first-time playthrough, as well as a way to give new players a nice grudge to pursue. Black Knights in Dark Souls, Hide Knights in Dark Souls 2, and a bunch of different enemies like these one-off demons in Dark Souls 3 are completely optional fights that guard rare treasure or quest objectives. Most first-timers will usually try these fights a few times, but get distracted by the comparatively easier foes on the critical path. But for players who want a challenge, these guys help to break up the monotony of playing through areas you've already mastered by sticking you with an additional challenge that's tough for even real-life MLG Dark Souls pro gamers like myself. That's not even mentioning how really hard enemies can be a great way to teach players a lesson. Risk of Rain's gradually advancing timer begins to spawn tougher and tougher baddies as time goes on, eventually going so far as to